Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. This is the second part of my conversation with Wendy Wagner. In it, she provides a recap and some perspective on the first episode. Then it's on to Samoa, Tahiti, and BoraBora, then to Easter Island, and on to Chile. In place after place, she meets challenge after challenge until she finds herself in a remote Chilean mining town, alone, stripped of all her sense of identity. And as she says, a voice from 1678 reached out to her by way of a book she found in a tiny bookstore. The entire title to the book reads, The Pilgrim's Progress, 1678, by John Bunyan. From this world to that which is to come delivered under the similitude of a dream, wherein is discovered the manner of his getting out, his dangerous journey, and safe arrival at the desired country. Wendy perseveres, and her journey is not easy. She doubts everything, including herself. Yet it is in this inhospitable mining country that Wendy finds a sign that pushes her into Bolivia, where the adventure really begins.
So I wanted just for a minute to really recap my motivations for this crazy trip. Primary amongst them was learning how to hear guidance. I just finished the Course in Miracles, and I'd done 2 years of study with that, and I was convinced that, it's everyone's birthright to be able to hear. And I was a very wobbly stage where every once in a while I think I could hear what what was actually God's voice, so to speak. And, sometimes not. I was still making a lot of mistakes. But I had in Hawaii escaped a really, really scary situation, and heard at the end of the, when I was saved miraculously was, when the way is hard, it's not the way. You do not have to suffer for God in any way. And that to me was one of the first really clear pieces of guidance I'd ever gotten. So that was one very big piece. The other big piece was I had so many questions inside of me. Sometimes I just wanted to die. It was just like so unbearable that I couldn't find the answers of very simple things like, why am I here? And more importantly, as time went on, how do I get out of here? The whole idea that we had to spend thousands of lifetimes trapped in this reality did not appeal to me. And I wanted to do anything I could to get out. And certainly this trip that I'm about to talk about was part of that. It was seeking that. It was seeking answers. There's no doubt about that. And the third real big motivation was the whole, my name is Wendy, and I'd always been fascinated with the story of Peter Pan. And after I did the Course in Miracles divided thought into the worldly thought, material plane thought, time thought, past, future, versus the real world, which was way more pleasant, way more beautiful, and way easier to be in. And, that really, really coincided with Neverland for me. Not just Neverland, but then I began to wonder, what on earth, why are there's so many stories about this other land? And, the commonality between all of them was it's way better. Heaven, for instance. The coolest thing about the Course in Miracles, it asked me at one point, why wait for heaven? So it was really indicating that we don't have to wait, until we die to be happy. It made a very big point about this. But still, we have these stories about nirvana, heaven, Oz. And then we have Carlos Castaneda talking about Don Juan, and he makes the same distinction. The tonal, which was the material plane, the plane of the senses, and the nawal, which is harder to even describe, but, clearly a much better reality. And Don Juan makes a distinction, and he says between those two worlds, there is the space between the parallel lines of the two worlds, which he called the borderlands. And interesting, the Course in Miracles had also talked about the borderlands, that space between the world and the real world, where your mind is sort of like, the Course in Miracles talks about 180-degree shift in thinking, and your mind is wobbling back and forth between these two realities. The cool thing about rereading Castaneda was seeing that when your mind is doing that, flipping so radically between the two, it means you're very close. That was extremely, extremely nice for me to hear. So where we left off in the last episode was I had given up everything in California, given up my life as a graduate student, and just said, okay, this is it. I have to jump into the void. If I'm going to learn to hear guidance, I have to just jump. I was a fledgling bird. If I was going to learn how to fly, there was nothing to do but leave my secure branch and just jump into the world and say, okay, God, what do you want me to do next? Now, right now, I'd really like to define the difference between what God is to me. And it's extremely simple at this point. God is that which wants to lead us towards happiness, that which is in totally 100% kind energy that only wants our happiness and is working really, really hard to help us find it. And basically, we're 180 degrees off course, absolutely every single one of us, thinking our happiness is going to be found in riches or relationships or, fame, all of those things. And the opposite of that is the ego. And the Course in Miracles makes a big deal about the ego because it's essential to understand it. I can define the ego as that which wants to make sure we never reach our happiness and is constantly trying to lure us into things that will make us unhappy, wrapped in beautiful packages. Now, I'm not going to get into what I think the ego is actually. The Course in Miracles calls it a mistaken identity. It is everything we were conditioned with as children that make us feel less than, that make us feel unworthy, that fills us with guilt and fear and all of those things. Fear being, the big distinction in the Course in Miracles is that the two opposites are actually love and fear, not love and hate. Hate is a child of fear. So overcoming fear is a giant piece for any warrior, as Don Juan would call us. The warrior's whole job is traverse the borderlands from the world to the real world. So here was my beginning of attempting to do this. And so I went to New Mexico and there met a man named Satnam Singh. He was a Sikh, and he told me that he had just been on a journey to this place in Bolivia that was an extremely magical land in the what's called the Yungas of Bolivia, the Bolivian high altiplanos at 12,000 feet, very, very flat. And in it, in certain places, there are these giant cracks that are very wide, and they're down to about 8,000 feet sea level, altitude. And therefore, absolutely anything can grow there, and all sorts of wise beings have gathered there. And the only way you can find it is if you're attuned enough to find it. There had never been bloodshed. The people lived in genuine harmony. And as he told me this story, it was like a fire started in my body. I mean, seriously, I was like overheated immediately as soon as he started telling the story. And in fact, there was a book called Secret of the Andes that detailed it, which I devoured immediately and was even more passionate about finding it. Everything it said, and it was just triggered the parts of me that wanted a magical journey, that wanted to live Raiders of the Lost Ark. I wanted a spiritual adventure so much. I was reading things like The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East by Spalding. And in these books, these masters would be in the jungle somewhere, and all of a sudden a mountain would open and a giant panther would come out, and this great wise being would begin to teach him and everything. And it was just like I was completely infected with these kinds of ideas with no real ballast, other than trying to hear guidance so I didn't kill myself in this journey. So I knew right then that this was the place I was destined for. I wanted nothing more than to find this place. I wanted my daughter to come with me into this place and be saved from all the insanity of her, growing up and all the dangers and all of that. And so while I was in New Mexico, her stepsister, who was only a year older, so she was about, I think they were 8 and 7, 7 and 9. They both had birthdays while we were traveling. So off we went. And I really couldn't, reconcile why I was taking 2 children into the Andes. But I thought, okay, just step by step, we're going to see what happens here. And maybe some giant miracle will happen. I'll be able to take these children with me into this place. I wanted to save them both. I want to save myself also. So we first went to Hawaii, and basically we had an incredibly beautiful time there. It was not my first journey. And, but it was a stalling time for me. It was so lovely and so easy. And I was tutoring the girls, and we were swimming every day. We were super healthy. And we'd found this retreat center that was just starting and still building. And so it was affordable for us and just incredibly lovely. Found a boyfriend who was really a huge adventurer and really loved my idea of, going off and finding this place. And so I think several months went by, and I finally went, okay, Wendy, you've got to get yourself moving. You've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone again and start this journey. And I would meditate for days asking, like, what's next? What should I do next? And just heard nothing. But gradually I sort of started having this craving to experience the true Polynesia, and decided to go to Samoa. For no real, there was no real rationale behind it other than the fact that I wanted to experience pure Polynesia. So off we trooped to American Samoa, and landing there was one of the greatest shocks of my life. I mean, there was not one sign in English. That was Western Samoa, but American Samoa was just yucky. It was a military installation, and the people had been literally infected with sugar and alcohol and were not nice to us. And the place had a horrible vibe. And it was the beginning of my teaching around that places are very much like people, and you get along with some and you don't get along with others. And it's vitally important to feel the difference. I couldn't stand Western Samoa. I wanted to get out of there so bad. So we took a little puddle jumper plane, just 80 miles, and the difference was night and day. The people were so kind and they were healthy. There was no alcohol around. The outdoor markets were chock full of beautiful food, none of which we'd ever seen before. But landing in Samoa was a terrible shock for me. This is Western Samoa in that I, I didn't want to dilute guidance in any way, shape, or form. So I didn't read anything about the islands before I left. I didn't want it to influence my thinking in some way. And so when we landed, there was not a single sign in English. There was not a single person who spoke English. Everybody was running around in little pieces of cotton cloth wrapped around their waists, and the men had giant hibiscuses in their hair, and they were huge and strong and just gorgeous people, all their teeth perfectly intact. I later realized all of this was due to coconut milk, but I diverge. I had the two kids who immediately regressed into being like 2 years old. And they were clinging to me just like toddlers, like each one had a leg. And I'm like trying to figure out what on earth I'm going to do. I did find a list of places, hotels and things like that, I guess, but I couldn't read it. It was not in my language. So I asked the girls to sit someplace, and I went into some corner someplace, and I was sweating buckets and shaking all over. I had no idea it would be this difficult. And I was like, okay, God, you've got to talk to me. You have to talk to me right now. And I was hearing nothing. I mean, even God didn't, I don't know, does he know Samoan? How could I be directed anyway? Finally, it looks like, okay, there's one entry in the list of maybe 20 things that looked a little bit like it was standing out. And I said, okay, finally, after about half an hour of sweating, so I wrote down the name of it on a little piece of paper, went outside to where all the buses were and showed it to all the bus drivers, 5, 6 bus drivers. Finally, one says, okay, come on, get on the bus. Well, the bus took forever. I had no idea it was taking us way out into the very primitive jungles of Samoa. And Samoa was very primitive back in 1982, this must have been. The buildings there were only in the main town of Apia were there some buildings. Otherwise, there were fales, and these were cement floors, pillars, roof, period. No walls at all, which was such a metaphor for the Samoan people, who were truly amazing. So it was this classic bus ride of, goats getting on and off and chickens and the whole thing, but took forever. And finally, they drop us off at this very, very outback, teensy little hotel right on a little bay, which was not very inviting, kind of grayish water. And we stayed in these little fales that did have walls, but were really mildewed and funky. And it wasn't that great, but it was actually kind of perfect because it was quiet and I could sort of sort myself out and figure out what I was going to do next. So I think I spent one night, and then the next morning I decided, well, go out for a jog and get your head cleared up. And there was a short little lane to the to the little hotel, and I jogged, and all of a sudden the lane opened up, and I realized I was smack dab in the middle of a Samoan village that was just going about its business, and it was talk about another world. It was so amazing. I just stopped dead and looked around, and it was like beautiful, beautiful, lush, rolling hills, really tiny hills, and then all these fales perched on these hills with no walls, and flowers all around each of the fales, and people working in the gardens and things. It was just a scene of immense harmony. And as soon as I took a few steps out into the little dirt road of their village, I was thronged by villagers wanting to give me papayas and bananas and coconuts and come stay with us. They'd say the word palange, palange, which was white person, which was obviously pretty rare occurrence. But in that run, actually, I met with a beautiful young man who was probably about 18. He was finishing high school. He was he was very different from other Samoans in that he was very tall and thin, and I called him a prince right from the beginning. His name was Mikaele, and it turns out he was the son of the chief of the entire village. And he took us home. This another day, he took us home to his father, who at the time was 70 years old, could still climb the highest coconut tree. And in Samoa, they are huge, and Samoan coconuts are so delicious. But anyway, we ended up spending an enormous amount of time with this family, and it this was another one of my big motivations because here I was in paradise. This place was the Garden of Eden. This family of what, 15, 18 people, I'm talking about the chief's family, they lived on $6 a week. That's all the money they ever needed because everything came from the land, everything. Maybe the cotton, the little cotton lavas, we call them, that they tied around their waist was there one of their biggest expenses, I think. Everything, there was the grass mats, um, all the food was recycled. It's still today, I understand, the model all over the world for sustainability. It's really a remarkable culture, and the people were extremely remarkable. And they were very, very kind. Missionaries had come in and thoroughly, indoctrinated them, but somehow the Samoans took all of Christianity and turned it into something very loving and generous and kind, and they mixed it with their own culture in a beautiful way. Um, but I felt like a god overseeing the Garden of Eden, and everybody in it wanted to jump out of it. It's like they wanted Levi's, they wanted what were those Game Boy things we had? It was the first ones that ever came out. They wanted those like crazy. I'll never forget the strangeness of sitting in a Quonset to see a movie, and the movie with Samoans all around me on benches seeing Star Trek. And I just couldn't imagine what they made of that movie. It was a very strange incident. So I really was experiencing unspoiled Polynesia. And always when I was participating with this family, I remembered my life in Palo Alto and the just like racing up Highway 101 and racing home and working so hard to pay rent and just like the phenomenal stress in my life, and against this amazing backdrop of real genuine harmony. Such a beautiful place. It really was. So I think we stayed. So finally, at some point, very near the end, Gary, the man I'd met in Hawaii, did join us, and that was a giant relief because I realized I really had bitten off more than I could chew. And towards the end of our time there, I think we spent about over 3 months there. The girls were like, you know what? I'm ready for hamburgers and potato chips and Coke. And they had really fit in. They had done amazingly on this journey, and they were just tired of it. And I couldn't for the life of me see how I was going to continue the trip with them, especially the Bolivian part of it, because now I had finally decided, okay, stop fooling around. It's time to start heading towards South America. And so the girls begged and pleaded and begged and pleaded. If it weren't for all their begging, I would not have sent them. But I did. I sent them home to Bess's father, who lived in New Mexico. And genuinely, one of the most painful moments in my life was watching their little plane take off and watch them turn into little blinking lights. That was really, really, really hard. And I was just like, really, God? So it means I have to give up my daughter too? I have to sacrifice? What's all this? What is it? So onward we went. And right before I left the mainland of the US, I had come in contact with a great teacher. I don't know how to pronounce his name properly. I've never heard it spoken, but he was very popular in Europe at the time. people in the U.S. didn't know much about him, and I'll say it badly, but his name was Omram Mikhail Ivanov, and he was he knew he'd studied all the different religions and was an amazingly intelligent man. But it really came down for him to, if you really want to know anything, drop all your books and just listen to nature, listen to God, listen to the sun, listen to water. And I started thinking that I really wanted to do that. And I was very facilitated by the fact that Samoa had no books in English. And really, the rest of the trip, there were no books in English at all. So I was doing more and more of that. So finally, okay, so then we go to Tahiti, which was we stayed on Bora Bora for a while, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Going underwater in Bora Bora was like a magic world where all the creatures were neon purple and turquoise. It was unthinkable. It was really amazing, and there's much more to say about it, but I'm going to skip because then we went to Easter Island. Easter Island was the most impenetrable mystery. You know, I was trying to really understand and have the island teach me anything I, needed to know. And boy, she was tight-lipped. She wasn't going to let go with one single mystery. It was beautiful to watch her sort of like her boundaries were like, you're not going to find a thing here that's going to give you any answers. Meanwhile, the moais were everywhere. I don't know, people get the impression that there's a few on the island, but they're everywhere. These giant, giant statues. And every smooth rock face had carvings on it of birdmen. I mean, just like remarkable place. But finally, we land in Chile, and Santiago, Chile. And Santiago, of course, after I don't know how many months at this point of being in the South Pacific, was completely freaked me out. Just the noise and the traffic and and at one point, we took a hike outside of Santiago, and we were up high on a high sort of mountain, and we could look down on the entire city. And all I could see is it looked exactly like a cancer right in the middle of this gorgeous landscape. Suddenly there was this teeming black smoking mess. So in very little time, being in Chile really, really started making me feel like, okay, you're getting close, girl. You really got to really start work. You got to work to. The word that kept coming up for me during that time was I had to work to purify myself, to clean myself of the ego, to clean myself of any unforgiveness, or, I wasn't really sure what it was, but I knew I had to do it. And so Gary found a friend who wanted to go down to Patagonia, the southern part of Chile. And I said, no, I want to do a thing all by myself. I need to do a vision quest again. And we happened to meet some really beautiful people at that time who said, oh, there's these beautiful hot springs up in the mountains, and we can take you there. It's 2 or 3 hours into the mountains, but we'll take you there. And I, of course, had visions of, hot springs, you retreat, kind of visions of all the California and New Mexico hot springs swirled in my mind. And I thought, perfect. I won't have to suffer, but I can get the work done. So Gary and I split up for the month, and oh my God, these hot springs, they were, first of all, the little village they were in, the village of Lequigne, it's called Lequigne because it was so full of water. There was water everywhere, pools and ponds and waterfalls, and it was also freezing cold. I don't know. To this day, I don't know exactly what month we were in. We were in the Southern Hemisphere, so I really wasn't sure where, I was very disoriented time-wise. But there was probably maybe 10 shops in the little village. And then the hot springs themselves, the pools were all slimy, like algae pools. And then my room was tiny and mildewed and not pretty at all, kind of gray everything. And I was like, oh my God, I have actually condemned myself to a month of this. Now, mind you, this means I had no TV, no radio, no books, no music. Let me see, no telephone, absolutely nothing to entertain myself or distract myself, which was really the point. But when I really faced how difficult that would be, first 2 days I was like, yahoo, I'm free, no one's bugging me, no children, no man, nobody. And then I was like, oh my God. So I spent a lot of time with the water, and I was really trying to learn from the water, and I actually really did. Um, there was many things I learned in Le Quigne. One of the most remarkable things that happened was, I'm still trying to find that. Okay, here we go. I was desperate for some entertainment of any sort, because I'm trying to do all this meditation. Understand, all the moments in between waking and sleeping were meditation, but it wasn't feeling good. I was sure that if I just, did practically nothing but meditate, I would be joyful, and everything would be easy, and these things weren't going on. I was in terrible conflict with myself. I was thinking, it's like my ego was just like raging at me, telling me how stupid I had been. Why did I come on this journey in the first place? And all these mistakes I had made. And now the children were gone, and I missed the children so badly. And on and on and on. I was just in a nightmare of, this voice sort of screaming at me. So I was walking through the teensy-weensy little village one day, and I spied in one of the shops a book in English. I seized it. And amazingly, this was amazing. The name of the book was The Pilgrim's Progress. This was written in 1678, right, by John Bunyan. The whole title of the book is The Pilgrim's Progress from This World to That Which Is to Come, delivered under the similitude of a dream, wherein is discovered the manner of his getting out, his dangerous journey, and safe arrival at the desired country. Well, there was one part in that book that was remarkable to me, because it was in it. I can't remember, Pilgrim was in the valley of the shadow of death. And that is where the voices were screaming at him and screaming at him about, all the negativity possible. And there was nothing but wasteland all around him. And yet he was guided through the valley of the shadow of death. It's like he was saying that Christ had his hand and was taking him through the valley of shadow of death. And I can't tell you how much comfort this gave me, because I just thought I was crazy and failing miserably, totally failing. And I was like, an angel reached down from 1678 into my present reality and really saved me in those moments. And so that was my my big highlight of my Le Quigne journey, which ended in a month. And I was actually able to reunite with Gary again in Santiago. Santiago began to drive me crazy really fast, and I thought, I've lost all my clarity. It's like all those beautiful crystal clear waters of Le Quigne were now muddy and gross in Santiago. But one of the things I had learned in the Quigne is no matter where the water has to go, no matter even if it travels into the sewages of Santiago, it will always reach the ocean. And that meant a great deal to me. That if I just kept trying, I would find my nirvana. I would find the monastery of the Seven Rays, where the great Incan sun disk was housed. And so we spent about a month in Santiago, and then we went up to a mining town. Gary's friend was with us, who he had gone down to Patagonia with, and they started cooking up another trip while we were in this strange mining town. This mining town had a huge effect on me. The boys wanted to go see the mine. It was considered one of the largest in Chile, or one of the largest on Earth, I think. And my curiosity got the best of me, and I thought, this is going to be gross, but I'm going to go see for myself. And so there was supposed to be this big elevator down into the bowels of the earth, and I was also curious about that. And so we arrive at the mine, and they knew we were coming. Now, mind you, when I looked across this mine, it was so huge that trains on the other side of it looked like the size of ants. It was just enormous. And then we go into the office as a big mine head honcho. And he's uncomfortable, you can tell. And he says, well, I'm going to go get the suits that you need to go down in the mine. And he comes back and he only has 2 suits. And he looks at me and he's all embarrassed and he's flipping from Spanish to English. And he's saying, lo siento, señora, pero women are not allowed in the mine. They're bad luck. And I was struck in that moment with, even now, all the emotions are coming back up. And I didn't understand why I was being so emotional all of a sudden. And so the guys go do their thing, and I'm sitting with a head honcho with just a few feet between me and him for like an hour and a half. And I am determined not to cry and be a baby. And I'm sitting there holding my jaw, like holding myself in so I don't start just weeping and crying. So the boys come back. No, what happens? Okay, so I'm trying so hard not to cry. So then I go in the bathroom, and I'm coming out of the bathroom, and I bang my finger on the bathroom door, and it hurts so bad. And so then I start crying, finally. And then the crying starts a bloody nose. And so I go out, the guys come back, I'm holding this big Kleenex up to my nose, which was lucky because maybe, I thought, then they couldn't see me crying. Still had no idea what was wrong with me. And then the mine honcho goes, okay, let's give you a tour of the slag heaps. And I'm like, oh, goody, slag heaps. And so I go with the guys, and I'm really grateful that I have this big wad of Kleenex because the bloody nose is just not stopping. And because I have to hold my head up, so I can't see the slag heaps very well, thank God. So we all get together and we all go back to that mining town. And I'm still completely on fire with emotion. Again, that incredible fire was in my body. Had no idea. The boys all thought I was just crazy and were giving me a lot of space. Finally, we go to bed, and I make sure till Gary's asleep. And then I start writing in my journal. And then it all comes out that I had just seen my mother splay with her fucking guts just all over the place. And I could hear her cries. She was screaming, help me, help me. And the point of this story is that my mind was set from then on that I was going to find this place of harmony and beauty where no one hurt the earth, And my will was set, and even though the next day was Valentine's Day, I was determined I was going to go on another vision quest for another month. And Gary was totally pissed at me, and they went to go climb their huge mountain. And I went with no advance notice. I thought I saw a town on the map, Antofagasta, that was right on the ocean. I thought, once again, I had these beautiful visions of, oh, maybe I'll have a little cottage by the sea and do my retreat. And so I actually had a really lovely ride, overnight bus ride. It was really cool in Chile. Actually, they'd have a hostess come around in the morning and deliver you orange juice and donuts, and you had a reclining seat. It was quite pleasant. But nearing Antofagasta, I was starting to get really freaked out because it was easily the ugliest town I'd ever seen in my life. There was this just complete absence of color. At one point, after I found a place to stay and everything, I went to look at the ocean, and it was like the ocean was gray, the sky was gray, the buildings were gray. The sun never shone. You couldn't see little sparkles on the ocean, waves. It just was everything was too gray. It was like I'd entered a nightmare. And my first night in that, I found some crappy hotel and laid down on the bed, and I was just literally trembling so hard I could barely see straight. I was so scared about what I had just done to myself. And I kept going, God, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. God, I'm so scared. And finally, this voice chimes in and says, start saying, God, I am peace. God, I am peace. And thank God that actually did work. And my body started to calm down. And it really came to me why I was so scared. It was like every piece of my identity that I relied upon was not there. I was no longer a mother. I was no longer a girlfriend. I no longer had my mother tongue. Nothing in my surroundings was familiar. I wasn't a PhD candidate. Who was I with all of my identity completely erased? At some point during this journey, I can't remember where it was, but I had this dream that I was a number and I was being reduced to my lowest common denominator. And I was that's what was happening. That was for sure. So I hated Antofagasta. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack for some place to stay and to live. And so I thought, okay, look, I got to move up to the mountains. There is absolutely nothing else to be done. Surely it's better in the mountains. And so I took a little bus. And once again, I hadn't read a thing about where I was going. What I did not know was that it was, again, a huge mining town. There was a giant copper mine right nearby, which meant that absolutely nothing grew. Nothing. So I entered this little town. I never did go see the mine. I was not going to do that to myself again. And it was the unhappiest little town I've ever seen in my life. I got a room over a bar, and I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. But when I ventured out into the town, there was literally not one flower, not one blade of grass, not one tree. There was a tiny trickle of a stream, I remember, but there was no other sign of life other than the unhappiest people I've ever seen in my life, because they also worked in the mine. The mine was everything. And again, the sky, you never saw the sun. In the entire month I was there, I never saw the sun. It was all gray sky, gray sand. And then I went to the travel agency, and this beautiful woman there said, "You can have a room at my house. I'll give you this room for $20 for the month." And she thought this was a huge boon to her economy. And so I was in this storage room with boxes all around, but it did have one bed. And my window overlooked a car mechanic shop, which was hot. So the gray sky down into the gray metal mechanic shop, the gray street. And I'm like, so this is when I become very aware that I had always depended on beauty as a sign from God that I was on the right track. And so I began to doubt myself extremely. The name of the town was called Kalama. And I was fighting with myself for the entire month. There was no books in English to save me in this town, none at all. Couldn't speak to a soul. No one spoke English. Um, Food was terrible, canned everything. Ugh, this was really gross. And so I was in terrible, terrible doubt because despite the fact that I'm meditating all the time, it seems like I'm getting more and more and more depressed because I'm really sure now that I'm off course. It's like this could not be part of God's plan, it to be in such a horrible, desolate, awful place with no beauty. So I thought, you know what? This is just an external reflection of me. I'm desolate inside. I am a wasteland. So there it went, down, down, round and round. Really, really, really difficult time. Especially since all of our literature says, you just meditate a lot and you will become a joyful person. And I was failing. I was clearly completely failing. And I had to be purifying myself for this Andes so I could be attuned enough to be able to find this monastery. So it was obviously a very hard time. So here's what happened. By now, my relationship with God is changing from sort of a supplicant, sort of, oh, please, God, could you please, type of thing, to, okay, what's going on here? So what happened was I made a deal with God. I said, look, I need a sign that I am on the right course. I need a very clear sign. I'm not kidding around anymore. This has been miserable. I think the whole trip to the Andes is completely insane. You have to give me a sign if you want me to keep going on. And I knew I had to create a sign. I had to ask for a sign that was hard. It couldn't be something simple, of course. And so the town blew my mind with desolation so much that every once in a while I'd ask somebody, when the last time it rained. And it was 1960, and this is now 1980 one or two or something like that. 20 years since it had rained. Everybody said the same thing. Okay, God, you make it rain. If you want me to continue this journey, you make it rain. And I mean rain. I was getting uppity. So then, all right, so miraculously, Gary and I find each other again, which was really, truly miraculous. And he's there. He's got all his stuff in my room. I'm already feeling irritated because of the noise and the talking and all of that. It's the night before we're meant to leave. We're going towards Bolivia now, right? We're going towards La Paz, Bolivia. So this is my last big step towards, meeting Juan Flores about in La Paz, Bolivia. So I'm getting very scared and feeling absolutely not ready. And so we're packing stuff, and I look up and I notice there's little spots of rain on the windows, little piddle spots. And I wait and I wait and I wait by that window, and I'm like, come on, rain, come on. But it doesn't. And I'm like, I go into meditation, I leave. Gary, I'm pissed. I'm really pissed by this point. I'm like, really, God? I don't mean a piddly rain. I've been lying on a bed of nails for months now, devoting myself 100% to you. I don't want a piddly rain. I want rain. I want a clear sign. Okay, so Gary and I, next day, we're packing, and we're just about at that point where we're standing at the door of where I was staying, and about like waiting for the taxi to come pick us up. And out of the blue, this torrential downpour begins. No prelude of thunder, lightning, nothing, just whoa, just swoosh, it just like fell out of the sky. Not for a second, it kept on going and going. We were drenched in seconds. People were coming out of their houses and dancing in the streets. Then the lightning and thunder started. So the rain went on for a long time. I think we were taking a bus to northern Chile. Rained all night. I managed to argue with God about it. Was that really a sign, or did he just really want rain really badly, or was it a coincidence? But it gave me the impetus to keep going with this crazy journey that just proceeded to get crazier and crazier and more out of my realm of what I think is reality. And it's what I called, now I'm deep in the borderlands. I think really Kalama was really going deep into the unknown, into the completely unexplored. And again, it is, Don Juan explained the borderlands as absolutely nothing to recommend them save what they lead to. Desolate beyond imagining. And that's really what I had been experiencing. And so that, unfortunately, hadn't remembered that stuff till I returned and reread all of Castaneda. And it was enormously comforting for me and educational for me to view that time as borderlands. So we're finally ready to board the train to La Paz, Bolivia. So that means we're going to cross a mountain range. It's really hard to even explain. Oh, first of all, the train that we were in was the exact replica of the Long Island Railroad train that I used to travel a great deal when I was a teenager. So I was in this really weird world of circularity because it wasn't a replica. It was one of those cars that used to be used on the Long Island Railroad. But in this little scenario, it was so crowded. First of all, none of the windows had glass in them, and it's below zero. I mean, it's below 30 degrees. It's freezing. And hundreds of people are piling onto this train in the middle of the night in a town that was completely blacked out, not one candle. I can't even tell you how disorienting that was to enter a whole village without a single flash. Very few people even had flashlights, and everything was black. And all you could hear was voices calling in the night, Maria, Maria, ¿dónde está Maria? Like these ghost-like voices. Finally, the train pulls in, we pile in. And rather than sitting on seats, well, we were first class, right? There were no seats. People had piled, and these were mostly women. They'd piled all their stuff to within 2 feet of the ceiling of the train car. So we were all way up, sitting up on top of these giant piles of goods that they're taking from Chile into Bolivia, which I also didn't know Bolivia was in the midst of a tremendous financial crash, where I think their currency crashed 500%. And so there were no goods in Bolivia. So in the middle of the night, I decide I have to pee. The train has stopped, and I have to literally crawl over bodies, for the entire length of the car, and then climb down to the part where there's a joining between cars. And there was a conductor type guy there. And I told him I had to pee, and he said, okay, go outside the train. Oh, he tried the bathroom door, but it was chock full of drunk people. I mean, he couldn't even open the door, and the stench was unbelievable. Okay, so I go out, and I'm terrified, of course, because if that train starts moving, my entire everything goes with it. And it's colder. It's really cold. There's snow up to my calves. And I'm struggling with all these layers of clothes because I really wasn't prepared for winter at all. I still had tropical stuff that I was kind of piling on to try to get warm. And I'm sort of, so I'm taking my pants down and I'm starting to pee, and I hear all this laughter. I'm like, what is, it's all women. I hear women's laughter, hysterical laughter. And as I'm starting to pull my pants back up, trying to sort of run for the train at the same time, I look up and there's women covering the top of the train in the snow, laughing in the pitch dark. I was blown away, completely blown away by the toughness of these people and the poverty level. I finally get back. The next morning, a really, really, really sweet thing happened. So the Altiplano is really flat and there's nothing on it at all. And the train stops so everybody can get out and take a pee. And every single man on that train is watching me because as we get out, there are no bushes. There's nothing I could go behind. And I had pants on, and every other woman on that train had skirts on. So I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? They're all just blatantly staring at me, waiting to take my pants down. So those sweet women who I actually cuddled with all night, they're, mamita, por favor. They wanted part of my sleeping bag. And so we shared a sleeping bag all night and, wide open. And so all of a sudden, all the women understand what's going on, and they make a circle around me with all their big skirts so there's no one can see. And I get to pee in privacy. It was the sweetest moment ever. And then the train begins its long descent down. So like the Altiplano is at 12,000 feet, and I think La Paz might be at 10, something like that. So it's this long, creaky journey all the way down into La Paz, Bolivia. And I know now that I am about to contact Juan Flores, who can give me directions part way into the monastery of the Seven Rays. And I am scared. And the town scares me. There's like one street that's kind of civilized, and every street that went up from there goes into more and more and more strangeness. Big strangeness, dark strangeness. So I'm going to leave the story of how we found Juan Flores, and we were given directions to the Devil's Bell in the next episode.
Want to hear more of the conversation? Sign up at bumpintheroad.us as a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. You can give it a go for free. Just use the code FREEMONTH. And thank you for listening today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.